In the vast expanse of our world, millions of people go missing every year. While most of these are straightforward and are resolved quickly, usually resulting in the missing being found, this is not the case for some. Amongst these disappearances, there are those that stand out and leave nothing behind but a trail of questions and an echo of their absence. In the disappearances we're about to discuss, seasoned searchers and experienced law enforcement officials express their sheer incredulity at the circumstances as presented. Let's begin by going back a short time. On the 7th of February 2018, a 49-year-old firefighter by the name of Danny Philippidis vanished in a bizarre fashion while on a skiing trip to Whiteface Mountain, located at Lake Placid in the state of New York. Danny lived in Canada with his wife and 2 kids, but at this time of the year, he found himself on a skiing trip with 7 of his co-workers, which I believe they did every year at around that time. This meant that over the years, Danny had grown a familiarity with this area and was very comfortable being there. As a firefighter, Danny was obviously in great shape. He was a healthy and successful man, which perhaps makes what happened to him all the more unusual. Danny was an avid skier, and the entire group were enjoying themselves on the day in question. It got to around 2:30 PM, and as far as I can tell, the group wanted to stop and get back to the lodge for a bite to eat. Danny, on the other hand, was in the mood to continue on and do some solo skiing, so that's exactly what he did. He said his goodbyes to the group with the intention of doing a couple extra runs down the course, and so they split. Though these goodbye pleasantries were not supposed to be expressed so literally. The group made it to the lodge just fine, and Danny was supposed to meet them there approximately 30 to 45 minutes from the point at which they separated. This, as you might imagine, did not happen. About an hour or so had passed, and Danny's friends began to realise that it had been a little too long at this point, and they became slightly uncomfortable but didn't realise there was a problem. They reasoned he just might not have been hungry yet and was enjoying his solo ski. However, as time went on and it got a bit darker, the ski course was starting to close for the day and Danny still wasn't back. The group began to worry as they realised nobody had even heard from him. They'd received no text messages or anything like that. I'm not sure what scenario was running through their minds outside of just worrying, but they soon realised that they had to go retrieve him. They first checked his room in the hope that he'd come back and had fallen asleep. Instead, what they found was an empty room full of Danny's belongings. These belongings included an extra set of his skis and boots, his passport and ID right where he'd left them. They then realised his car was still parked outside, which is when they rushed to the reception to report what had happened, because now everyone must have been thinking that Danny had been involved in some kind of accident, because at this point they were aware that he hadn't just left without telling anyone for some unknown emergency. Given what had transpired, the authorities were quickly notified, and this would begin the start of a massive search effort. A lot of snow had fallen on the mountain before Danny vanished, which, while this might have been a good thing for the skiing trip, this wasn't ideal for a boots-on-the-ground search, which made it difficult. That being said though, the mountain ended up being packed and hundreds of people, including helicopter teams, drones, search dogs, volunteers and professional searchers, poured onto the scene. These searchers scoured this area for 6 days but didn't find a single trace of Danny anywhere. This confused everyone involved because the mountain was very bright and Danny, realistically, should have stuck out like a sore thumb. The mountain is also forested somewhat, and all of which were grid searched extensively and no one could figure out what had happened. The presumption was that he must have been on the mountain because his car was still parked and all of his personal belongings were still in his room. Yet they couldn't find any ski trails leading away. Though, the tracks would have been covered by snowfall at some point, I'm sure. But even still, Danny wasn't the only person skiing at around the time he separated from the others. But no one could recall even seeing him. It's not clear as to how he'd managed to get so far away from everyone else, not only to vanish, but to do so without being seen by anyone at all. At no point during the 6-day search did the dogs find a scent, despite the fact that they'd quite literally searched the entire area by this point. No one had any great ideas as to what happened to him, but once the search had been suspended, Danny's family were told that he couldn't be found, and at some point he must have succumbed to the elements. While I can understand how that conclusion might have been drawn, the authorities must have known how strange that was because they had no evidence of anything at all. This is not typical of a search of this magnitude. They thought that the dogs would fill in the blanks and bring about a conclusion, but instead, the fact that even they couldn't find anything at all just made this incident even more bizarre. It was as if he'd been plucked from the face of the earth while out skiing alone on that mountain. The authorities did make it clear that the weather worsened during the search and the mountain saw heavy snow, which brought them to the conclusion that he not only couldn't have left the mountain, but that he also couldn't have been too far from the course itself. It's also interesting that on the day he vanished, the ski course was particularly busy and lots of people were out and about. Yet no one seemed to remember even seeing Danny at all that day, despite being shown his picture. Because Danny was by himself, and the fact that investigators mentioned the heavy snowfall, they must have felt something along the lines of, while out skiing, Danny must have suffered from hypothermia and skied or walked off into the adjacent forests. The issue with that though is Danny was reasonably dressed for these weather conditions, and especially while he was moving around the way he was, you wouldn't necessarily expect someone's core temperature to drop so low. Perhaps then, they may have thought he could have suffered an injury which brought him to a standstill, at which point he passed away due to the elements or the supposed injury, and then later had been covered by the snow before they could find him. These aren't unreasonable lines of thought, but no, reality is sometimes stranger than you think, so let's get bizarre. 6 days after this incident took place, Danny's wife was sat at home with her friends who were comforting her. She was in mourning and trying to come to terms with what happened and what this means for her life, but out of nowhere she received a call from a number she didn't recognise. It was one of her friends that initially answered the phone, but it was quickly passed to her. She noted that the man sounded very similar to her husband but was groggy and disoriented. She immediately knew that something wasn't quite right with the person on the other end of the line, as he wasn't coherent. It turns out that this was Danny, and he was telling her that he had no idea where he was asking where she was, what had happened, what was going on, and he was just generally in a confused state. During this phone call, she then repeatedly begged Danny to call 911 so that he could be found and brought to safety. He agreed and did that, but then also found it difficult to even describe where he was to the authorities. They started to ask him what he could see, and he did his best to provide them with the scene, and thankfully it was enough for them to come and get him. To take another bizarre turn, it turns out that Danny was no longer in the state of New York. The call he'd made to his wife came from over 2,500 miles away at the other side of the country in Sacramento, California. They found him at a rental car place next to an airport, and to make matters even stranger again, when the authorities found him, he was still wearing his skiing gear. He had his jacket, winter pants, boots on, and somehow had a new phone, and had somehow also gotten a haircut despite having no money on him. Everything he had been left at the ski resort in his room. The authorities went on to say, and I quote, "On our end, it left a lot of unanswered questions. It was apparent that there were a lot of issues going on with the gentleman. He was very disoriented and obviously in need of medical assistance. Danny had managed to travel over 2,500 miles away, so he obviously had not travelled that on foot. So, he'd managed to hitchhike a ride all the way there? By who? If Danny had suffered a head injury and had managed to get down the entire mountain to a road, dressed completely in his ski gear and confused, why has the driver just taken him instead of calling for help? What was going on there? And how did he end up with a new phone? Did someone take pity on him and give him it? Even that falls apart though, because they didn't call any help for him. There is clearly missing information somewhere here. For 6 days, where did he sleep and eat? He must have been in California for a while. It must have been odd for people to have seen him walking around in his skiing gear. Nothing about it makes sense. Right, while Danny was being questioned by law enforcement, Danny stated that the only memory he had was being dropped off by what he thought was a big rig truck in Sacramento. Then somehow, at some point, he'd gotten a haircut and got an iPhone and was able to call his wife. Weirdly, he specifically mentioned that he felt compelled to accomplish these goals, which is a very odd thing to say. Aside from that, he had no other memories of the entirety of the previous 6 days he'd spent missing. He couldn't remember what the truck looked like, who was driving, or even when or where he was picked up. If it's even possible to make this weirder, in addition to everything else, nobody had even seen a rig truck in this area at the time. So who even knows how far away he got first? The authorities considered the possibility that Danny was taken, but there ended up being no evidence of this at all. He hadn't been robbed. If anything, he'd gained an iPhone and a haircut. He hadn't been injured and still had his ski clothes on. Law enforcement said that he'd been very cooperative, but they were just as confused as he was. His bank, mobile phone and medical records had all been checked, but they offered no clues as to what happened. Interestingly, despite receiving a medical examination and not actually having any injuries, Danny reported feeling as though he'd sustained a severe head injury. Philippidis believes he lost consciousness sometime shortly after splitting up with the others. I went down and the next thing I knew, I woke up cold and sore, Philippidis told McQuigg. He doesn't remember much about the next few days, but believes he passed through Utah in the truck, more than 3,000 kilometers away from Whiteface Mountain. In his interview with McQuigg, he still had more questions than answers. There is a lot that he's had to resign himself to the fact that he simply will not know, McQuigg said. The supposed truck driver who transported him to Sacramento could hold the keys to the puzzle, but authorities were unable to identify the driver. It's still overwhelming and shocking to think that it happened, Philippidis said. Who this supposed driver was is a very good question. As mentioned previously, how can you pick up a person that's clearly disoriented and confused and then proceed to drive them all the way to California? I've no idea. The New York mayor at the time, John Tibbetts Jr., said that the incident was a head scratcher, which is a bit of an understatement, and with that apt statement, let's move on to the next incident. Let's discuss the odd disappearance of a young boy named Keith Parkins. Keith was 2 years old when he went missing from the rugged hills of Ritter, Oregon on the 9th of April 1952. It was Easter time, and on that cold snowy day, the Parkins family had gone to visit Keith's grandparents at their remote family ranch. On that morning, Keith was with his 2 brothers, Michael and Terry, who were 6 and 5 years old. They were all outside the ranch home, playing together. Recently, at that time, a new calf had been born, and the kids wanted to see it, so off they went to play near the barn. It got to lunchtime, and Keith's mother, Edna, called the boys back inside for some food. Michael and Terry came running inside excitedly together to eat, but there was a problem. There was no Keith. Edna asked them where he was, and the boys told her that Keith had decided to go out the barn in the opposite direction to them. Edna sent the boys back outside to retrieve him, but they came running back inside once more, saying that they couldn't find him. Edna then went out herself and walked around the perimeter of the barn and couldn't find Keith either. Then she wandered inside, but he also wasn't there. After a few minutes of searching and calling for him, a gut-wrenching panic and dread set in. Edna rushed back to the home and explained that she couldn't find Keith. Alan, Keith's father, rushed outside along with the other adults present, and they fanned out from the barn looking for him. It's not clear at all what happened, but after Keith separated and travelled around the back of the barn by himself, something must have happened quickly. This impromptu search failed miserably, and Edna and Alan were no closer to finding their son. They soon realised that this incident was bigger than they were, and they needed more boots on the ground. The family contacted law enforcement, and a large-scale search effort was underway quickly. Within hours, the local community had been mobilised, and on that same day, there were over 200 volunteers fanning out from the ranch searching for him. This effort began at around 2 PM that day and went on well into the night. As the sun began to set and visibility started to drop, one of the locals found small footprints in the snow around 4 miles away from the ranch. This was a massive distance for Keith to have covered because it's very hilly, so how he'd managed to accomplish that alone wasn't clear at all. The searchers were dumbfounded and must have been second guessing themselves as to whether or not they actually belonged to Keith, but the prints were alone, with nothing surrounding them, adding to the group's conclusion that they were left behind by him. These prints were the only clue that they'd managed to find so far. Unfortunately, and strangely though, these footprints did lead away for a distance in the snow, but they didn't go too far before petering out into nothing and they became untraceable. This became a major issue because it was already freezing cold outside and the searchers were being chilled to the bone on this pursuit. This was concerning because if they were struggling with the temperatures, what must this struggle have looked like for Keith? As darkness began to fall, the temperatures dropped well below freezing into the night, but searchers remained vigilant and continued on. At around 6:45 the following morning, a man called Charles Shoyne began shouting and calling for attention. Alan happened to be around 200 yards away from this call and rushed over to find Keith laying in the snow face down in Skull Canyon, which is in the Blue Mountains. Somehow, from the point that his footprints were initially found, Keith had travelled another 5 miles west. Calling this journey a 9-mile travel is selling this feat short. It would be 9 miles if you could travel in a straight line without any obstacles in the way. Keith was on a mountain and had somehow crossed many hills, valleys and just rugged terrain in general that were in between him and his final destination. His father was later said to have been astonished at this. Keith's jacket and hat had also been removed, which were found in the snow a short distance away from him. The temperature on this mountain night dropped far below freezing. He crossed at least one icy stream and went through snow and fell exhausted on Bald Point, just up Deep Canyon above the North Fork of the John Day River. He was practically frozen at this point, but somehow was clinging on to life. Alan said that his skin was freezing cold to the touch, that it was blue and that his entire body was rigid. He thought that when they came across him in the snow that he'd already passed away, but nevertheless, and thank goodness he did this, but he picked him up in his arms, had him covered in a blanket, held him tightly and ran the entire way back to the ranch without stopping. His adrenaline must have kicked into high gear in those moments, as that's an impressive feat. While Alan was running back to the ranch, a plan had been devised to get Keith to the hospital in the shortest time possible. A pilot had been arranged to have his aircraft ready to go not far from the ranch. This pilot flew Keith to Pendleton Airport where an ambulance rushed him to the hospital. Against all odds, thankfully, Keith did make a full recovery during his stay at the hospital, and his resilience surprised everyone involved. Apparently, he came very close to passing away during that ordeal. The only clues that were left behind as to what happened to him were in the form of scratches to Keith's body and a tear in his overalls. Keith also later stated that he'd been scratched by a cat at the barn. At the time in 1952, people knew full well that this entire incident was weird, and they tried to make sense of what could possibly have happened to him. Practically everyone involved didn't for a moment believe that Keith had travelled all that distance in that terrain under those weather conditions alone. As a result of this, one prominent idea was put forward to explain it. That being that someone may have taken him from the barn as he separated from his brothers and went around the back. In addition to that, it was posited that whoever did this may have posed as a searcher and gave up trying to get Keith out of the area. That was speculation, of course, and was never proven, though it's rather impossible to prove one way or another after the fact. Others believed that instead of a person, he might have been taken by an animal, perhaps a mountain lion or something to that effect. Keith had stated that he'd been scratched by a cat, though it's thought that he was referring to a regular cat as opposed to something perhaps larger. Keith, sadly, was never able to articulate what had happened to him. He was very young at the time and wasn't able to express himself and was never able to remember what this ordeal looked like, even as he got a bit older. He just simply could not remember the time he spent missing in those 19 hours. To fast forward to a more recent time, some years ago now though, Les Stroud of Survivorman took a particular interest in this disappearance after hearing the circumstances surrounding it. What seemed to intrigue Les the most was the sheer distance travelled in the area in question. Les tried to recreate the journey, and to paraphrase, he said that Keith had travelled 9 miles, but that 9 miles is as the crow flies, and is going to be many more than that when you add legs into the equation. Because as mentioned earlier, you just cannot traverse this place in a straight line. Les said that you would have to believe that this 2-year-old boy covered a distance that is at the very least more than 12 miles in 19 hours in the hazardous and rugged area in question. As Les was moving through this area in his recreation attempt, he was lucky enough to have had a full moon as darkness began to fall. But even so, in those conditions, he wasn't able to continue on overnight as he just couldn't see very far in front of him at all. So Les, in essence, could not successfully recreate the journey in the time suggested that a 2-year-old boy had done it, and he did not for a moment believe that Keith made it that far on his own. He expressed his incredulity at that suggestion. So, what in the world happened then? If Keith had been taken by another person, then why on earth was he taken further into a wilderness area instead of just completely out of the area and away from the resulting and inevitable search? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Furthermore, if a mountain lion had taken him, it seems that you would probably have expected animal predation to have taken place shortly thereafter. This thankfully did not happen. Thinking about it under those terms reminds me of the disappearance of Casey Hathaway and his belief that he was with a bear for the entire time he spent missing. I'll leave a link to my coverage of that in the top right now and in the description if you'd like to open a new tab. I remember covering 2 disappearances in the past where something particularly unorthodox and unusual was suggested. That being that we could potentially be looking at an aerial disappearance in the sense that a large bird of some kind may have lifted the missing straight up into the air. Now, the sheriff said something interesting. Instead of disappearing on foot, the sheriff begins to contemplate a disappearance from above. I could go along with the possibility that he could have been taken by an eagle, but it's difficult to accept the boy's disappearance by either a bear or a cougar, said the sheriff. Black bears are known to be around this area, but it is unlikely that Yuki had been exposed to a bear because these bears leave footprints and there would have been drag marks. Considering that Yuki's scent is interrupted in the middle of a forest, it might be more likely to state that a large bird or an animal that crosses a tree might have taken her, but there are no monkeys or chimps in this forest. I'll leave a link to the full videos in the description. Now, could a suggestion like that make any sense here? I honestly have no idea, but I'd certainly be interested in hearing your thoughts on this. What do you think happened to Keith all that time ago? Now, let's have a look at another disappearance that I've previously covered that might fit this description. In October of 1969, Robert Winters, a 78-year-old man, vanished during a hunting expedition with his family. The group was in the vicinity of Sparks Lake in Oregon, located in between Broken Top Mountain and Mount Bachelor, an area that is apparently a popular hunting spot. For over 2 decades, Robert and his sons, Charles, George and Alvin, had been making annual hunting trips to Oregon, making the disappearance all the more puzzling. On October 8th of that year, Robert set out to hunt, not realising that this would be the last time saying goodbye to his family at around 11 AM that day. However, as darkness crept in, Robert was nowhere to be found, causing great concern among his loved ones. This was highly unusual behaviour for Robert, and it was clear that something had gone awry. Unfortunately, the situation was compounded by worsening weather conditions. Heavy snowfall began, dumping around 1.5 feet of snow in the 24 hours following Robert's disappearance. The family promptly alerted the county sheriff and called for help, leading to an immediate search and rescue operation involving between 50 and 60 people. While some people arrived and began searching that very night, the majority arrived the next morning. An aerial search also began, and a helicopter would reveal tracks close to Soda Creek, located at an elevation of 7,100 meters, just shy of 2,000 metres higher than his position at Sparks Lake. Despite exhaustive efforts that included the use of tracking dogs and a helicopter, no trace of Robert or his hunting equipment was found beyond the tracks discovered earlier. Searchers followed the tracks, but they seemed to lead nowhere, eventually petering out. The harsh winter weather and heavy snowfall made the search difficult and ultimately proved insurmountable. Eventually, the search was called off due to the hazardous conditions. The situation remained unresolved until the following summer of 1970, when Dr. Jack Crosby, who happened to be on a hiking trip, stumbled upon some items near Soda Creek, close to where the tracks had been seen during the aerial search. Jack quickly reported his discovery to the sheriff's office, and a search was launched in the area where the items were found. A search party began looking Tuesday for Robert's remains after his disappearance set off one of the most extensive searches in Central Oregon history. More than 9 months after the disappearance, Jack found hunting gear, glasses, and other effects. Robert's family identified the items and clothing at the site. The man's billfold with money and identification was also found. County Sheriff F.C. Scholes said all Robert's clothing had been found except for one boot and a glove. He said the condition of the clothing showed the presence of wild animals. The Sheriff's Department conducted a meticulous 3-day investigation in the area where Dr. Crosby had found the items. The search may have yielded the recovered items, but no remains were discovered. Moreover, there was no evidence of an attack by either an animal or a third party on the clothing. Notably, the clothes appear to have been removed deliberately rather than torn apart by an animal as part of an attack. The circumstances surrounding Robert's disappearance and the discovery of his items continue to baffle investigators, leaving behind a situation that wasn't well understood at all. Deputies Mel Newhouse and Norman Thrasher, who conducted the investigation at the discovery site, described the scene as very odd because they didn't have a great understanding as to why no remains at all were present. It seems that they expected to put this incident to bed and provide a full explanation to the family. The circumstances, though, remained unclear, and many hypotheses have been put forward to explain what happened to him. Some have suggested that he may have fallen into the creek and been swept away by the water, while others have speculated that he may have been attacked by an animal such as a bear or a mountain lion, which seems to have been discounted. And it's important to bear in mind that there wasn't really anything in the way of evidence to support either. There was no signs of a struggle at the scene where his equipment was found. Some have also suggested that Robert may have become disoriented and lost in the wilderness, especially given his age. However, this explanation was also a problem for some, given that Robert had been hunting in the area for over 20 years and was familiar with the terrain. As said, the sheriff's deputies who worked this case would later reveal that they themselves didn't have any great explanations for why they never found the remains, only stating that they simply didn't know and it was a major peculiarity, so clearly it seems that fact didn't sit well with them. Despite the exhaustive search efforts and the discovery of Robert's hunting gear, clothing and other items, to this day remains have never been found. The further searches for Robert's remains were eventually called off, leaving his family and the surrounding community with many unanswered questions. What do you think happened here? Now moving on, this is a disappearance I featured on the channel earlier this year, but not too many people got to see it, which is unfortunate in and of itself, but also for another reason. I've seen people describe this one as perhaps one of the most unusual disappearances they know of. On the 29th of April, 1981, a man by the name of Dr. Maurice Dames, who was 84 years old at the time, vanished in Colorado's Pike National Forest, near the area known as Devil's Head Peak. Unfortunately, there is a total lack of information in regards to Devil's Head Peak, despite its somewhat creepy name. You'd think that there might be some kind of history there, but all I can really find is an extract from Wikipedia that states that the name comes from prospectors of the 1800s. Apparently, from the southwest of Devil's Head and looking northeast towards the mountain, there is a shape of a face laying flat as if the mountain was looking up. Some of the forest is supposed to have softened the looks over the years, and there used to be a more obvious eye socket and facial features. Though honestly, I can't see any of that in the only example image I could find. By all accounts, Maurice was an intelligent, successful, and a very friendly individual. He and his family were said to have had a lot of friends all around the place they lived. On the day that Maurice disappeared, he was with a close family friend, though a name wasn't given in any of the original articles I could find about this. This companion was stated as being younger than Maurice, but again, I couldn't find specifics in terms of his age. At this time of his life, Maurice wasn't particularly in good health anymore, which is to be expected at his age. Some sources stated that he had bad legs, though based on what I can find online, I'm led to believe that he had problems with his knee specifically, and he was considered disabled. At this point in time, it was said that he wasn't really able to get around without assistance, but thankfully, he and his family were well liked and they had a lot of friends. So Maurice was still able to get out and about doing the things he loved with people he liked. It was also stated that Maurice had a blood disorder, which was another factor of his disability. While again, I couldn't find specifics, I believe that this is also something that required him to have assistance and prevented him from being able to travel very far on his own. Maurice always held a major interest in geology, so both he and his companion were topaz hunting that day, as they so often did, but this time would be different in a way that quickly became very difficult to explain. As shown here, the pair of them arrived at Topaz Point at 10 AM in the morning. The companion parked the car on the roadside and they walked between 50 and 200 yards from the road based on the article reading. And they walked until they found a couple of spots that they wanted to dig. They separated so they weren't getting beneath each other's feet, though each pit was said to be very close together, to the point that they were still able to communicate with raised voices. They each had their own bag with some gardening tools to help them dig, and I believe they did find some topaz at this location before stopping after 2 hours. At this point, which was said to be around 12 PM, they got together, chatted and had dinner in one of the pits, Maurice's, I believe. After relaxing with this makeshift picnic for around an hour, they decided to get back to it but wanted to dig at a new spot. They then followed the same procedure, walked for between 50 and 200 yards away from the road and found 2 spots that I believe this time were a little further away from one another. I believe it was further away because each of them dug for around an hour and a half before the companion came to check up on Maurice, which took place at around 2:30 PM or so. I believe that he then told Maurice that it was about time they left and that it was time to bag up their topaz. The partner left for a few minutes, though some say this was 15 minutes, finished up, put his things together and then carried them back to Maurice's pit, only this time to find Maurice wasn't there. The search for an 84-year-old man reported missing in the Pike National Forest near Devil's Head Peak resumed at dawn today with the aid of a Fort Carson helicopter. Dr. Maurice Darmetz of Boulder County was reported missing about 3:30 PM Wednesday, the Douglas County Sheriff's Office said. Darmetz was last known to be in the area rock hunting with a younger companion, a spokesman said. On Thursday, 6 members of the El Paso County Search and Rescue Team joined the search, which was centered in an area of rough terrain about 3 miles south of Devil's Head. Ron Holliday, president of the local team, said about 80 volunteers scoured the area Thursday trying to locate the man. Darmetz and his friend were separated for a few minutes and the friend could not relocate Darmetz, Holliday said. Darmetz is known to complain of chest pains when he walks for extended periods of time and was wearing only light clothing. You'll notice in this original article from the time Maurice disappeared, it said that they were separated for a few minutes. Other, more recent articles say this time was 15 minutes, so I'm not sure what to think there. Anyway, this article was interesting and a slight contradiction because this article didn't mention anything about Maurice's legs or a blood disorder, stating that Maurice's problem stemmed from chest pains after walking for extended periods. The insinuation perhaps being that Maurice could in fact walk these longer distances, though it would cause him great discomfort to do so. The friend, on the other hand, was said to be confused and didn't really understand what had happened because he didn't think that Maurice could have made it back up to the car without his help. The indications pointed to the idea that Maurice had cleared up in the pit because you could see where he'd been sitting, and he'd rebagged his gardening tools because they were also not present anymore. The partner went back up to the car, thinking that Maurice must have headed towards it without him noticing, but he wasn't there. He then travelled back down to the pit and began calling for Maurice into the forest, but there was no response. He said that there was nothing present to indicate that something bad had happened in terms of animal predation, which was ruled out very quickly. The reason that was ruled out almost from the get-go was because, frankly, and without being too descriptive, it is very obvious and very messy. In addition to that, the companion would likely have heard that go down. I get the impression that he wasn't really sure about how to proceed from here, so he went back up to the car and began honking the horn, presumably thinking that Maurice must have walked off the wrong way. Again, there was no response, and he spent the next 40 minutes walking up and down the road into the tree line and back to the pit Maurice was digging, but there was just nothing. He didn't see or hear Maurice or anything out of the ordinary. He also hadn't heard or seen any other cars or anyone else present. After 40 minutes of searching, finally another car did pass and he was able to flag it down, and now local law enforcement were made aware of what had gone down. A deputy arrived and searched for a short time with him, but they basically repeated what had already been tried, and then the authorities called for professional search and rescue teams. This search began the same day that Maurice disappeared and grew throughout its duration. About 200 searchers failed to locate an 84-year-old man lost in the Pike National Forest near Devil's Head Peak. The search for Dr. Maurice Darmetz of Longmont was called off at dark and was scheduled to resume at dawn today. He has been missing since Wednesday afternoon. He was reported to be in the area rock hunting with a companion, but could not be located after the two were separated for a few minutes. Again, a few minutes. I'm not sure where 15 minutes came from. Anyway, these snippets from the papers were interesting because I believe that search dogs arrived at the scene on the night of the date that Maurice had disappeared, but they weren't able to find a scent leading away from the pit. Again, there was no indication of animal predation to be found anywhere. The ground wasn't disturbed, and it didn't appear that Maurice had been dragged away or anything like that. Meaning, it appears though the authorities didn't believe that foul play had occurred at the site either. Over 200 people searched for 5 days at this location and never uncovered a single clue as to Maurice's whereabouts, only that they could see where he'd been digging. On the 5th day, search leaders said that they'd exhausted everything they could do and they just couldn't find him, and ended the search on that basis. Searchers failed to locate an 84-year-old Longmont man missing near Devil's Head Peak. The search was called off at dark and was scheduled to resume at dawn today. Search and rescue teams suspended their search Sunday for Maurice pending further clues, said search coordinator Tom Fior. That means that if someone comes up with something, we will go back in. Or in other words, and as said, they really had exhausted everything they could think to do and everywhere they thought to search. I can only imagine that after the dogs failed to reveal a trace of where he might have gone, things became confusing and difficult almost immediately. Because there was absolutely no trace of him, Maurice's family started to think that something seriously out of the ordinary had taken place here. When the dogs couldn't find a scent, it was almost like he was pulled from the face of the earth, right from his topaz pit. Let's have a look at some extracts from this article. Darmetz's family believed that Maurice was taken by an extraordinary and profound event that held significant meaning to them. I really believe the Lord took him home to be with him. I can't imagine him being hurt in any way. He couldn't have disappeared that fast into nowhere. I have perfect peace about it. I don't believe he's suffering someplace. If I did, I wouldn't be able to stand it. Myrtle Darmitz, the minister's wife of 51 years, said, "They can't find a trace of him. I know he wouldn't get lost. He knows that place, every inch of it." A 5-day search for Darmitz was called off Sunday and the investigation was turned over to the Douglas County Sheriff's Department. Authorities are looking into the possibility that the man may have been taken, but Darmitz's family doesn't agree. Had he been hurt in the forest, they said, he would have been found by some of the many dogs used in the search. They said that had he been taken, they would have received a message or ransom demand by now. Mrs. Darmitz said that when her husband went out rock hunting last week, he was wearing old bib overalls and a white cap. No one would think he was from a rich family. Some things to take from that though are firstly, it's interesting that Maurice apparently knew this area quite well. I didn't know that up until now, but it seems, based on what was said, that he'd been going to this place for a long time. Secondly, of particular interest is the fact that despite the lack of evidence of him being taken by a third party, the authorities began to potentially suspect some kind of foul play in relation to the disappearance. I find this very interesting because there were no signs of that at the scene, and yet they were suspecting it anyway, at least privately. There was no evidence of him being dragged or otherwise forcibly removed from the area, and there was nothing present to suggest an attack had taken place. So what was law enforcement proposing exactly? Based on what we've read so far, I'm now not completely confident in saying that Maurice wouldn't have been able to walk from the area. Perhaps at a slow pace? Could a third party have made him walk from the area with them? I feel that the dogs would have found a scent trail if that had taken place. The companion said that he hadn't heard or seen any cars at all up until he'd searched for Maurice for around 40 minutes already. So it doesn't seem like Maurice had been driven out of the area. So what exactly was the suggestion then? Instead, could the suggestion be that he may have been carried out of the area? That feels like quite an odd suggestion, and what would the motive even be for doing so? Also, that sounds like a particularly challenging task in such rugged, hilly and uneven terrain. I do understand the thought process as to why the authorities might have started to lean in the direction of him being taken. You search for 5 days, you bring in over 200 searchers with dogs present for the entire duration. You can see where he'd been digging, but you can't find a scent there or anywhere else. That is pretty strange. The authorities did practically tell the family that if Maurice had been hurt in the forest and therefore still inside the forest, the dogs would have led them straight to him, but of course that didn't happen. Thus, I can only assume was the reason they perhaps began to conclude or speculate that he just simply wasn't in the area anymore. But how, why, when, and in what manner exactly could this have happened? The companion did leave Maurice alone for a few minutes, was the quote, or 15 I guess, I don't know, while they both packed away. But I don't believe that he was so far away that he wouldn't have heard him screaming, shouting, or otherwise calling out for help. It also appears that whatever happened to Maurice in that moment didn't happen right away because, as said earlier, it appeared that Maurice had packed away his garden tools first, as they were also missing. In that article, law enforcement did also contradict themselves slightly in suggesting that if he'd been taken by a third party, they should have received some ransom demands by now, because otherwise I suppose they were struggling to come up with a motive. It seems to me that it's inherently a little more complicated than that anyway, because I'm not sure how he could have been moved from the area in a way that wouldn't leave a trace or any kind of scent behind. Okay, now, Maurice vanished on the 29th of April that year. Around 2.5 months later, on the 18th of July 1981, Maurice's wife sent this to Richard Lamb, who was the governor of Colorado at that time. Dear Governor Lamb, on April 29, 1981, my husband, Reverend Maurice Darmitz, age 84, and a close friend of ours, were rock hunting in the Devil's Head area of Pike National Forest when they became separated and my husband apparently became lost. There was an extensive 5-day search conducted which resulted in no clues as to his whereabouts, and as of this date he is still missing with no new information. Many notices of his disappearance with pictures, description, and reward offer for information leading to finding him were posted throughout the region, but they have brought no results whatsoever. Relatives, friends, his hunting partner, my daughter and I have been in contact with the Sheriff Department of Douglas County, and we have talked with Stan Bush and Tom Fior, search leaders. We feel the Sheriff Department does not have the time or resources to do a more intensive investigation than they have already done. Since the search was very thorough, we must consider that while separated from his partner, Maurice might have been met with foul play or have been carried out of the area. Therefore, I am writing to you asking you to appoint some government agency or department to do something on our behalf. We feel that perhaps there is some agency or department that we are unaware of that could make a more extensive investigation. Any assistance you will be able to give us will be deeply appreciated by myself, my family, and our many, many friends. Anxiously awaiting your reply, I am. That help, sadly, would never arrive. She did receive a response from the governor, but it basically stated that no such help was coming. Very specifically, she mentions the idea and questions as to whether Maurice might have been carried out of the area. This suggests that she doesn't believe that he could have walked so far away and to evade the 200 searchers and dogs that were involved in the search effort. It also lends itself to the idea that Maurice may in fact have had bad legs or knees, or perhaps his heart condition or whatever condition he had was particularly debilitating to the point again getting so far away was not likely at all. I don't even remotely know where to begin with the suggestion that he could have been carried out of the area. By who exactly? That would have to be someone extremely strong to the point of ridiculousness. I say that on the basis that the friend hadn't seen or heard any other vehicles around. So I can't imagine that he could have been carried away far enough to avoid the level of searching that took place there. It seems for that to make sense, a vehicle would have had to have been present for him to be driven away instead. I don't usually do this, but I thought that I'd scan around to see what suggestions people may have had in relation to this disappearance. I've reworded the following a bit just to get to the gist of what was being said. Could he have believed that his time was near and decided to walk into nature to purposefully pass away on his own terms? He might have decided against wanting to spend his last years confined to a bed or wheelchair. It might not even have been planned, perhaps a spare of the moment decision. I personally can't really get on board with that suggestion because based on what we've heard, it seems that Maurice shouldn't have been able to get too far away based on the conditions he had. I lean towards the idea that he would have been found in that scenario. Could he have fallen and received an injury, perhaps to his head? Maybe he wasn't able to respond. I can't imagine someone taking him and disappearing because that makes even less sense. How could someone whisk him away so quickly, taking all his equipment and leaving no signs behind? I'd defer to my previous response again. In that scenario, I feel that he would have been found with over 200 searchers and dog teams in the forest. I agree with the second part of that statement. I feel that a vehicle would have had to have been present in order for him to have been taken so thoroughly away from the area. This next one is interesting, and perhaps might be something many people have potentially suspected over the years, though I could find no evidence to suggest the family thought this next one. The only scenario that comes to mind is that maybe his topaz partner did something to him and then removed the body. Maybe it was on the same day he disappeared, or maybe earlier. I can certainly see why people could lean in that direction, but that quickly delves into quite personal accusations without any evidence, and a motive is also not clear. As said, it seems that the family wasn't on board with that idea. And I don't have any evidence of this based on the articles, but I'm almost certain that law enforcement would have sat down with his partner and questioned him thoroughly. Based on the fact that he wasn't arrested, I can only assume that they didn't have any evidence of this scenario. When this quote was issued in one of the articles, authorities are looking into the possibility that the man may have been taken, but Darmet's family doesn't agree. I wonder if they, in that moment, were referring to the partner that was never made clear. I could only find this quote in relation to the partner. The companion states that he last saw Mr. Darmet at the Topaz mine area located 200 yards or so from the picnic area along a steep, roughly forested hill. The companion had accompanied Mr. Darmet to the Topaz mine because they were acquaintances who often engaged in this activity together. They enjoyed surface mining for topaz in an area very rich with that mineral. Mr. Darmet was elderly and frail, but with the help of his companion, he could manage the 200 yards to the surface mine, as long as he contoured around the very steep hill. This is reportedly what he did. Just finally, I did find this discrepancy, though I suppose it doesn't really change much. On Colorado's Missing Person Gov website, Maurice's age is stated as being 75 on his disappearance, whereas Maurice's wife and all of the articles relayed 84. Perhaps that's just a mistake on the site, I don't know. I found this quote by a commenter that sums up my thoughts too. I have to be honest, this is one of those disappearances where I genuinely don't know. It's perplexing. I've pretty much exhausted all of the material that I could find in relation to Maurice, so it seems that now would be a good time to hand it over to you in the comments below. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like, hit the bell, and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. If not, then feel free to leave a dislike, I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys, peace.